Thank you, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Gail Horowitz, and I'm the president of the Northeast Ohio chapter of the American Constitution Society. I, once again, am so thrilled and blown away by the turnout today, and I just want to say how much I appreciate all of you taking the time out of your busy days to come and join us. I'm particularly excited to welcome to our second annual luncheon Senator Sherrod Brown and his brilliant wife, Plain Dealer columnist Connie Schultz. Believe me, getting the two of them together was one of our biggest scores of the year, so we're thrilled. This year has been one of extraordinary growth and energy for our chapter. In June, just after we last met, at the ACS National Convention, and before an audience truly filled with legal luminaries, our chapter was one of only 3 in the nation to be recognized. Our then one-year-old chapter received the Diversity Award for our commitment to a diverse membership and also to creating a very eclectic roster of programming devoted to cutting-edge issues in civil rights. But the Northeast Ohio chapter of ACS does not rest on its laurels, or laurel, as the case may be. This year, powered by the ingenuity of our 2007 and 2008 executive committees, we tackled an even more ambitious agenda of programming. Our goal was and is twofold. First, we tried to broaden our members' understanding of all sorts of issues of progressive law and public policy. And second, we try to build our progressive legal community through educational and networking opportunities. This year, we met these goals and far exceeded them. Our monthly free CLE programs emphasized issues on the horizon, such as the Northeast Ohio's foreclosure crunch, Iraq policy reform, and now, front and center again, just this last week, the fight for equal rights in the LGBT community. Seeking to expand our impact and, of course, recruit new members, we formed programming partnerships with organizations such as the Leadership Conference for Civil Rights, the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland, and the National Security Network. We also work closely with the incredibly supportive students, staff, and administrators at Case Western Reserve University School of Law and Cleveland Marshall College of Law, and we thank them so much for their wonderful support. As our chapter's membership and capacity has increased, so has its need for smart and savvy leadership. I'm thrilled to announce that in the last few months, under the leadership of Magistrate William Vaudry of Cleveland Municipal Court, where are you, William? Okay, well, don't clap until you hear what he's done. We have established our chapter's first ever Board of Advisors. The individuals invited to join our Board of Advisors are longtime leaders in our region's legal, academic, judicial, and civic communities, all of whom possess exceptional skills and backgrounds. And we're only one of a very small handful of professional chapters across the nation who's been able to set something like this up. We are so delighted that our executive committee will now be able to turn to this esteemed group for strategic advice and support on our chapters, all of our chapters' work. Will Magistrate Vaudry and all of those individuals who've been invited and have agreed to join our Board of Advisors, please stand up if you're here. Yay. Next, I must acknowledge, and I'm thrilled to acknowledge, the absolutely outstanding work of our chapter's executive committee. This devoted team works tirelessly to make sure that everything we do is executed with care, creativity, and passion. This year, they've helped this new group in town, with little name recognition and even a smaller budget, come of age as Cleveland's premier organization for progressive lawyers, judges, students, and leaders of all sorts. They have also each in their own way helped me hang on to my sanity for one more day. And for that, I am truly grateful. Would our executive committee, whose names are all listed in your programs, please rise and be recognized? On behalf of the Executive Committee, I'd also like to thank all of our employers who have graciously allowed us the time and resources to participate in ACS. I would also like to thank the many, many lawyers, professors, judges, and community leaders who have participated with us as program speakers this year or otherwise provided support in all different forms. And I'm so glad to see so many of our program speakers here today. I'm also thrilled to see today in our audience some very noted community members who I'd like to just briefly acknowledge. Judge Janet Burnside, back there. Judge Stuart Friedman. Judge Diane Karpinski, I saw before. Judge James Gwynn. John Ryan, State Director for Senator Sherrod Brown. And Dr. Betty Pinkney, District Director for Congresswoman Stephanie Tubbs-Jones. And if there's anyone I've forgotten inadvertently, please stand and introduce yourself to all. Okay. Now, with all of our chapter's good work, it's easy to forget that the world of ACS stretches far beyond Northeast Ohio. But thank goodness it does. The National Office staff provides not only exceptional resources and technical support to professional and student chapters across the country, but it carries on a much broader array of initiatives designed to protect and defend the constitutional safeguards that we all hold so dear. To tell you a little bit more about that excellent work, please join me in welcoming Lisa Brown, Executive Director of the American Constitution Society. It's an obstacle course. Welcome to Cleveland. Okay.
It is so fabulous to be here again. I met many of you a year ago at the kickoff of the chapter, and it's just great to see familiar faces. I feel like that we have such a presence here, and the enthusiasm here is always so amazing. And Gail, huge thanks to you, to Paul Castillo, who's the vice president of the chapter, to the programming chair, Joe Dunson, to the rest of the board. Everybody is listed in the program. I'm not going to repeat all the fabulous thanks that Gail just did. And welcome to the new members of the Board of Advisors. We are really excited to have you. This chapter is truly one of the leading chapters, and Gail, I guarantee that there are more laurels to come. This is really, we keep pointing to this chapter as an example of exactly what an ACS lawyer chapter can do. And I was looking at the programs that you all have done in the past year, and I felt as though if somebody fell asleep for a year, woke up and said, what's happened in the world in the past year? All they have to do is look at the programs that were put on by the chapter over the past year. Addressing the foreclosure crunch in Ohio, executive power, discrimination against sexual minorities, politicization of the Justice Department, race-based remedies in the Roberts Court, and that's only about a quarter of the programs that you all put on. And today's lunch is just another example with not one but two leading lights in the community, Senator Sherrod Brown and Connie Schultz, each of whom is directly engaged in the issues that will shape the future of this state and our nation. Senator Brown, as I think you probably all know, is working creatively to ensure that all people, not just the wealthy and privileged, have access to health care, have economic opportunities, have government assistance when they need it. And whether it's fighting for education for those who fight for us all the time in the military, or developing green energy policy that not only will help address global warming, but also will help us obtain energy independence and give opportunities to our workers. Senator Brown is thinking big, which is something that I think all of us need to be doing. And Connie Schultz likewise thinks big, using her public voice to make us focus on the needs of those in our society who do not have as much as many of us do, and to encourage us to address issues that go to the core of a just society. None of these programs would be possible without the generosity of the terrific sponsors of today's lunch. Gold sponsor, Baker and Hostetler. Silver sponsors, Calfee, Halter and Griswold, Jones Day, and Voorhees, Sater, Seymour and Pease. Bronze sponsors, Giffen and Kaminsky. Kathleen Havener, and Nuremberg, Paris, Heller, and McCarthy, and then community partner, the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. Thank you all. We really could not do what we do without you, so I am really deeply appreciative. And most of all, thank all of you for coming, because we are a grassroots organization, and you all are the heart and soul of this organization. And we are really looking forward to continuing to work with you, to continue building this chapter into ever more of a powerhouse. I spoke to you all a year ago at the kickoff about the hunger for ACS and the need for a vibrant response to the dominant conservative movement. And I think, sadly, the price that our country has paid for straying from our fundamental values of liberty, justice, and equality has become only more evident over the course of the past year. Who would have imagined that Brown v. Board of Education, the seminal case that overruled segregated schools, would be turned on its head to strike a blow against integration, that politics would trump the rule of law at our own Justice Department, that our government would torture people in our name, and that our CIA would be under investigation for destroying tapes of interrogation. The courts would be closed not only to individuals in our custody abroad, but also often to individuals suffering from discrimination, other injury here at home. But the opportunities before us now are tangible, and I know all of you in this room feel that. As we near the end of a primary season that has engaged people, old and young, re-energizing people in our democracy, everybody is thinking about the future. And as Ohioans, your voices will resonate particularly strongly this year. But what ACS is all about is making sure that your voices keep resonating year after year and keep helping to shape our democracy in the years to come. Our founders recognized that freedom, justice, and equality aren't going to be handed to us by those in power, and that it's up to all of us to get out there and fight for them. And that's exactly what ACS is here to help you all do. ACS is a potent voice and growing resource of ideas and person power for all those who are on the front lines really working for a better tomorrow. Emblematic of our work this year is our upcoming national convention. We host an annual national convention in Washington, this year on the theme, Revitalizing Our Democracy, Progress and Possibilities. There are convention programs on the table outside. I hope many of you will join us. It's June 12th to 14th in Washington with both today's and tomorrow's leaders. And I think if you look at the program, the breadth of programming and of speakers is really tremendous. So I hope you will join us. And the convention is simply the most concentrated example of the work that ACS is doing all around the country. Our national programs also include an annual Supreme Court review, standing room only at the National Press Club, press briefings on key Supreme Court cases, Supreme Court nominees, other issues of particular interest to the press, such as the politicization of the Justice Department. And we also hold now an increasing number of Capitol Hill briefings on issues of interest to members of Congress, recently on state secrets and on the destruction of the CIA tapes. Equally, if not more important, are the over 1,000 programs a year that our chapters now host around the country. We now have 164 student chapters and 30 lawyer chapters all around the country. This is in 7 years, and this is all thanks to people like you, the energy of people like you who've gotten in there and said this organization really matters. And the programs they hold, just as here, have high-profile public officials, leading academics, and then new voices. People emanate newer voices from the academy and from the public square. We now have 8 working groups on issues ranging from voting and democracy to economic and environmental regulation to access to justice to separation of powers, and a variety of publications now. The Harvard Law and Policy Review, which is the official journal of ACS, Advance, which is the journal of our issue groups, and ACS Blog. We publish a steady stream of papers on issues ranging from the constitutionality of voting rights for the District of Columbia to regulatory preemption, issues surrounding judicial nominations, and progressive constitutional interpretation. A major focus of our work this year, not surprisingly, but I should also say it's hardly the only focus, is identifying priorities for a new administration in the areas of law and justice. On the heels of the torture memos, the stories about the politicization of the Justice Department, the public is quite rightfully asking, what is a new president going to do? What is a new attorney general going to do to make sure that the priorities of a new Justice Department, whether it's counterterrorism, civil rights, criminal enforcement, will be based on impartial, principled decisions and based on the rule of law. So in addition to papers that we've already published on principles to guide the Office of Legal Counsel and the President's pardon power, we're going to be publishing over the course of the year a series of papers addressing priorities for the Justice Department, including one by former Attorney General Janet Reno, who is addressing overarching priorities for the department, Senator Kennedy about restoring the mission of the Civil Rights Division, and then others on depoliticizing criminal prosecution, establishing a progressive national security agenda, addressing climate change, and many more. One of our key long-term initiatives that I can't sit down without mentioning is focused on first synthesizing and then publicizing a theory of constitutional interpretation that emphasizes the progressive values that are at the core of our Constitution. Reminding people that is what our Constitution is all about, and explaining why our Constitution should and indeed must evolve with the times. So, as you all know, there's a lot of work to do, and we are committed to being an ever-growing resource for lawyers, policymakers, the media, judges. I encourage all of you to get involved in our work. There are membership brochures on every table. If you're not yet a member, please join. Encourage your colleagues to join. Write a paper for one of our journals, help Gail organize and Joe organize a terrific program for the chapter, write for the ACS blog, mentor a student, whatever works for you, just get involved because all of the organization's energy comes from all of you. In short, I hope all of you will keep the energy of this election season going and remain active participants in our democracy. In a democracy, people are policy, and that is especially true of lawyers. And real change is going to require far more than one election, and ACS is really about that long-term endeavor and long-term sustainable change. And if we're to achieve, I think, our shared vision of a just society, it will take all of us, every single one of us, your ideas, your voices, your writings, to make a difference. So stay involved, and I'm really optimistic right now that with all of your help, we really are going to make our country more true to its founding values of liberty, justice, and equality. So thank you again for being here. I now want to turn the microphone over to Connie Schultz, whose work emblemizes the effort in which ACS is engaged. And I want to reiterate Gail's appreciation for both of you being here, because it really is fabulous. I said to Connie on the way in, we could just as easily be honoring you today, having you speak. So this is fabulous. As you know, I can't wait 1 second. Connie is, Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Cleveland Plain Dealer and Creator Syndicate, and highly regarded author of several books. And she won the 2005 Pulitzer Prize for commentary for her pungent columns that provided a voice for the underdog and the underprivileged. And also, which I had not appreciated before, was the 2003 Pulitzer Prize finalist for her series The Burden of Innocence, which chronicled the ordeal of Michael Green, who was imprisoned for 13 years for a rape he did not commit. And a week after her stories ran, the actual rapist turned himself in. This may be very familiar to all of you. It wasn't to me, and it just made me think if only our work could have that rapid a positive impact. So Connie has won more awards than I could enumerate. No, I will not, but I want to quote one of them, the Batten Medal, which honors a body of journalistic work that reflects compassion, courage, humanity, and a deep concern for the underdog. We should all aspire to do such work, whether as journalists, lawyers, or policymakers. So, Connie.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, I don't get to do this very often, so it's my privilege to introduce my husband. And I really do think of it as introducing you to my husband. I realize he's your senator, Oh, he's my senator, too. I hadn't even thought of that. I do want you to know, Sherrod and I have only been married 4 years, as many of you in the room know. And when he first asked me out, I looked up his votes on gay and lesbian rights and reproductive rights before I said yes, because that was going to be a short cup of coffee. And when Sherrod got into the Senate race, when we decided in the fall of 2005 that he was going to run, he made a promise to me. Well, he made several. He kept them all. This one was particularly important to me. He was going to run as a progressive in the state of Ohio. Many of you will recall no one thought Sherrod could win, virtually no one. I remember our pastor said, I know he can do it. I know you're going to win, and I'm going to pray really hard for you every single day. That didn't quite sound like the faith I was looking for. But he did win. He did run as a progressive in Ohio because we knew what all of you in the room know, that being a progressive is true to family values. It does value family over all the different political divisions out there. And it means that you're for workers' rights and you're for individual rights, civil rights. And it means that you care about people keeping their jobs and their pensions and all. I have two quick stories to tell you about Sherrod that I think illustrates why you were right to vote for him in the first place if you did. Why you're right to have faith in him now and ask him here today. So I tell a wife story. Can I do that? All right. It's being back at the City Club with Sherrod reminds me of the City Club debate. John, Ryan, you'll remember this. The very last debate before the election in 2006. It was so packed, we moved it to the Renaissance. I recognize faces here. Many of you were here that day. About 1,100 people. And I remember that it was, as I said, about 2 weeks before the election, so we were pretty tired. We made Sherrod put on makeup before. That's always a fun thing to do. But we knew it was going to be televised, and he didn't want to do it. We always had the same mantra, think Nixon, Nixon, we want makeup. That always gets him there. So we got the makeup on. We showed up at Public Square, and the first thing we did is we went across the street. I don't know how many of you remember the Eyes Wide Open exhibit was back in Cleveland, which exhibits a pair of boots for every American killed in Iraq, and it also has an exhibit for the tens of thousands of Iraqi citizens. When I first wrote about it, it had only 800 pairs of boots. By the debate day, it was up to about 3,000. So we spent a couple of moments there. Then we walked across the street, and Sherrod was just swarmed by people, really happy people to see him. This was the last of the debates, and they were pulling on his shirt, pulling on his coat, saying, don't let us down. We're really counting on you. And so we got up there, and one of our rituals before every debate was to have a few minutes to ourselves, and we would say a little prayer, Sherrod and I together. And it wasn't, please let us win. It was, that'd be pretty tacky. It was simply that both men, the best of both men, would prevail on that day so that we could have a true debate on the issues. And we were sitting knee to knee, holding hands, and Sherrod said, you start. And I said, sure. So I started to pray, and then I realized that Sherrod had started to cry. Just a little bit, but it's a little bit right before the big debate. And I looked at Sherrod and I said, honey, and he looked up at me and he said, what if I let them down? And I thought he meant let the people down in the audience, in terms of win or lose the debate. So I said, you've been really kicking butt in the debates. You've been doing great. Now you're home. This is the final debate and it's in Cleveland. And he said, no. Did you hear the things they're saying? What if we let them down? And I realized that was the same fear that always got Sherrod up in the middle of the night during the campaign. It was never so much would he win or lose. It was would he let the people down who were counting on him? Because we saw so many people who had every reason to give up hope by 2006 who didn't, who started showing up and started contributing, often for the first time, to a political campaign. So I looked at him, and at first I tried to explain to him, Sherrod, you're not going to let anybody down. Nobody's going to doubt that you worked as hard as you possibly could on this. But it wasn't working, and I could tell he was just pretty upset. So I finally looked at him, and I said, all right, I'm going to have to say something I never thought I was going to have to say to my husband. And he looked at me and says, what? And I said, if you don't stop crying, you're going to smear your makeup. And it worked. This is why every man needs a wife, I'm telling you right now. Every straight man needs a wife. One final story. That same guy is now serving in the United States Senate. And I know this for many reasons, because of course I am his wife. But I remember the first time Sherrod presided over the United States Senate. And some of you know this, that when you're the freshman, you do a lot of presiding. And one of the things they tell you before you get up there is don't write. Don't sit there and do any writing, because if Senator Bob Berg catches you, he's going to come out on the floor and make an example of you for all of C-SPAN to watch. So they knew they were supposed to just get up there, sit there. I was in Washington for Sherrod's first chance to preside. And I was in the gallery, and I noticed that he wrote something. He took out his pen, wrote one line, put his pen back, and I thought, what is he doing? So when he was done, we were walking down the hall back to his office, and I said, Sherrod, what did you write while you were sitting up there? And he pulled out a piece of paper and showed me the one line he wrote that I now will keep for the rest of my life. And all he wrote was, I can't believe I'm presiding over the United States Senate. He is really, really proud to be there. And I am so proud to have him there. And I'm so thrilled to introduce my husband, Sherrod Brown.
That's why Connie gets more invitations to graduation speeches than I do, because she's so good at this. Thank you. Connie, thank you always for everything. And it's wonderful to be here, and I so appreciate the activism of this group. Gail, your energy and passion I can see, and just standing up here and the way you connect with people and the idealism you have and the looking for a better tomorrow. Thank you for that. And all of you as activists, it's so good to see some gray-haired lawyers. Stuart, and I don't mean Stuart, you don't have gray hair, but I just saw you for the first time, Stuart. To see gray-haired lawyers sitting at tables with young, eager associates and law students, and I so appreciate your fighting back, because the battles that you're fighting are so important to the future of this country. As Lisa said, it's not just one election. It's what happens at election day. It's what happens after the election. It's holding people to their promises and moving this country in a progressive direction. And I really believe, as Lisa and Gail's words both imply or stronger, that we really are in the cusp of a new progressive era. And I want to talk about that for a moment too. But it's pretty clear things in this country are about to change in a long-term positive way after darkness for too many years. And in the formation of ACS and what you do in chapters like Cleveland, and this is, from what I know too, not just from what Lisa said today, that this is one of the most vital and energetic and passionate chapters in the country. So thanks for making Cleveland proud, as you always do. As Connie suggested, I was going to tell a story about first I was going to tell, she mentioned the Nixon and the makeup thing. During our Meet the Press debate, which was, must admit, I was really nervous before that debate, and it was the first debate that Senator DeWine and I had, and we did it. I'm sitting there with Tim Russert, and DeWine was not there yet, and Russert starts telling me about the room. We're in this NBC studio in Washington. It's almost this warehouse. It's 4 times the size of this room, maybe 4 or 5 times. And we just have the little stage set, the Meet the Press stage set that you've all seen. And Russert says this was the room where the first Kennedy-Nixon debate took place. And that's what made me think of it with the makeup story. And as you know, the younger people here may not have understood that, but if you know, those of us that remember those days, Kennedy, that people say if they heard the debate only that Nixon may in fact have won, but watching it, Kennedy clearly won from people's reactions to it. And Kennedy, as you probably know, had put some makeup on his face. Nixon had not, and Nixon was known to sweat a lot. As we always thought in college, the more he lied about the Vietnam War, the more he sweated. We just kind of thought that too, but that's beside the point. Nonetheless, Russert's telling me this is the debate, and he said, you know what else happened in this room? And I said, what? He said, well, Bobby came in right before the debate in this room, before the Kennedy-Nixon debate. Bobby came in and turned the heat up in this room. So that was a little-known fact that obviously I've never asked Ted Kennedy that question if that happened, and I don't plan to ask Ted Kennedy that question, and I'm not sure if Ted would know the answer or want to tell it. And by the way, I talked to Ted's state director just an hour ago, and he's doing fine. He had the pleasure, and I would not use the word pleasure, of watching the Celtics beat the Cavaliers last night on television. So something about Boston, yeah, no kidding. On the floor of the Senate, when much of the Senate is done by seniority in terms of office selection, in terms of of committee selection and in terms and also the selection of desks on the floor. And Senator Kennedy put me on his committee with one other freshman, Bernie Sanders, the Health, Education, Labor, Pension Committee. So I work a lot with him. But on the Senate floor, there were, as we were choosing the desk by seniority, there were 10 desks left for the freshmen. And other freshmen were sort of scurrying around looking at where they wanted to sit on the floor of these 10 seats left. And I thought for a minute, it's not like you're sitting behind a pillar. This is the Senate floor. It doesn't really matter where you sit. So what I did was, because I just love history, as I began, I'd heard in one of the Senate orientations that a senior senator had told us that sometimes senators carve their names in the desk of the drawer, the bottom of the desk. So I started going around these 10 desks and started pulling the drawers out and looking at them and pushing aside so the one desk I came to, I pushed aside the congressional record and the committee reports and other things in the desk. And the first name I saw was Hugo Black. And Hugo Black was supposedly FDR's favorite Southern senator. And Hugo Black also introduced a bill in the early 1930s to call to establish a 6-hour workday in the United States. And it was considered so radical that it made FDR's 8-hour workday much more palatable to a reluctant Congress and a suspicious public. So, or maybe not a suspicious public, but certainly a reluctant Congress. Then as I kept looking at the other names in this desk drawer, Ribicoff and McGovern and Al Gore Sr. and others, and then I came across this was the desk of Robert F. Kennedy. So I knew I had found my Senate home. This was going to be my desk. So I asked Ted. His name, the other ones, sometimes they write full name or they write state, like it said Black, Alabama for Hugo Black. Kennedy had just said Ted, but just said Kennedy. So I said to Ted, I said, come here a second, would you? And he walks over and I said, is this John or Robert? And he said, it's Bobby's desk. I got Jack's desk. So I thought he kind of gets first choice here. So as many of you know, I'm neither a prosecutor nor a judge nor a lawyer, but the only thing you really need to understand what is going on in Washington is a little common sense and some appreciation for history, as I just tried to give you a sample. And when Alberto Gonzales makes John Ashcroft look like a civil libertarian, you know we're in interesting times. Not too long ago, the U.S. government spent $4 million in the archives building on the mall to fix or build a display around the document of the U.S. Constitution. It's framed, as you know, but it was framed. Better way of monitoring moisture levels. There's a special strong reinforced glass they used. Part of this $4 million was spent on a special strong reinforced glass. It's flood proof. It's fireproof. There's even a vault to lower the Constitution into if there's a nuclear attack, all to protect our Constitution. Imagine this administration wanting to protect the Constitution. My Senate colleague, John McCain, discussed this issue 2 weeks ago during an appearance at Wake Forest. He made some, as you saw, remarkable statements. After paying tribute to the efficacy of the framers' handiwork, McCain noted, and I quote, "There's one great exception in our day, however, and that is the common and systematic abuse of our federal courts by the people we entrust with judicial power. Assured of lifetime tenures, these judges show little regard for the authority of the President, the Congress, and the states. They display even less interest in the will of the people. So beware, there walk among us judges who disregard political and popular opinion." Imagine that. All too often, we in the progressive movement have allowed right-wing politicians and conservative hate-mongers in some case, some comprised of lawyers, to set the debate, especially on issues that ACS is so keyed in on and understand is so important. That's why it's so crucial that you're fighting back. Again, not just at election time, but between elections the way you're doing. As ACS grows, so does the potential of positive change in this country. Over the past 7 years, in the midst of 2 wars, a faltering economy, skyrocketing healthcare costs, it'd be easy to lose sight of the administration's penchant for operating outside the Constitution. Yet it's one of the most shameful themes of the president's reign. You know the litany better than I. Lisa cited some of them. There are so many more. Wiretapping, rendition, basically legitimizing torture, signing statements. The president has done more than 100 signing statements, changing, altering, obliterating 800 different provisions in legislation that the Congress has passed, habeas corpus, all of these issues. I disagree with my colleague from Arizona. I believe it's the executive branch that's tried to run roughshod over the work of the framers, whether it's the legislative branch or the judicial branch. Of course, Congress isn't above reproach. This Congress hasn't always fought back when the president overstepped his authority, when the president defied the constitutional separation of powers and dragged our nation down a path laid out by the wealthy few for the wealthy few. And speaking of the separation of powers clause, I want to take one issue that's not often discussed in terms of, not analyzed much in terms of separation of powers, and not often discussed in the nation's media. And it's the issue of Congress regulating commerce with foreign nations. And I picked that partly because I know 1/100th about most constitutional issues than you do, so I don't want to appear really, really stupid. But the other reason I picked that is because I actually do a lot in the trade debate, and I want to talk about the whole issue of Congress, in essence, giving away its powers to the executive branch to the detriment of working families and poor families and middle-class families, and to the detriment ultimately of our Constitution. The president has the power only by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, as you know, to make treaties. When it comes to trade policies, Congress is supposed to act, not to react. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the procedure called fast track, or trade promotion authority is the new term, because fast track had been so denigrated over the years. It's a process that delegates to the executive branch the congressional authority for setting trade terms as well as other powers. Congress lists negotiating objectives in fast track, but these are merely suggestive. They're not mandatory. They're not enforceable. For example, the 1988 fast track legislation, which was used for NAFTA negotiations, explicitly required labor rights be included in trade deals, and then the first George Bush administration simply ignored it, as they could. Fast track allows the executive branch to negotiate and sign the deal. Then it writes the implementing legislation. Then it can circumvent normal congressional committee review. Then it has guaranteed a vote on the floor within 90 days, something that the writers of the Constitution never envisioned. Congress's role is limited to an up or down vote with no amendments. Time for debate is limited to 20 hours. You cannot filibuster, unlike every other issue in the Senate except the budget. The Senate Majority Leader can't stop a fast-track bill. Legislature can't stop an agreement coming out of a fast-track bill, out of the fast-track arrangement, from hitting the Senate floor. Understanding this process, it shouldn't be surprising to anyone when Fortune 500 companies lobby members of Congress with a promise, with every promise and deal in the book. It's an extraordinary procedure that I think illustrates the controversy and the significance of trade policy. Stepping back and looking at economic globalization over the past decade, and understand this is the procedure that writes the rules of the global economy. And whether you agree with the Colombia Trade Agreement or not, whether you agree with NAFTA or not, it's a question, it's an issue that Congress has given away its authority, its constitutional authority, to the executive branch to write the rules of the global economy, no matter how those rules might come to play. So what we're finding, the dominant forces in these trade rules and in these trade laws, the dominant forces are no longer countries, but they're companies, many with revenues that surpass the GDPs of some countries. Businesses have written the rules and captured the process of governing globalization, of writing these rules. One of my goals in Congress from 15 years ago when I was in the House working on NAFTA was to realign the interests of corporations and country in doing this in a way that does not always pit business against labor. We see in NAFTA and the World Trade Organization rules and process that undermine democracy. We certainly are and should be willing to cede authority to international organizations to promote the common good. That goes without saying in my mind. But the results of these trade agreements show not only increased income inequality in the world, but a creeping erosion of democratic process and democratic institutions. The corporate investor protections of NAFTA, the first time any country we ever had a trade agreement that did that. Give extraordinary rights and privileges to private interests. Never before NAFTA could a company sue another government. It always had to be the U.S. A U.S. company would go to the U.S. government and ask them to take an action to sue another country for an abridging of trade law. But now under NAFTA, an individual corporation can sue another government. And let me give you the most salient, in my mind, insidious example of what happened there is they give this foreign investor the grounds to go to a NAFTA tribunal in this case to challenge a law. The government of Canada had passed a law, a public health law. Their Environmental Protection Agency and their health ministry had asked the Parliament to pass legislation banning a certain additive in gasoline. It wasn't lead. It was another additive, something called MTE. This additive, the public health ministry thought this, and the health ministry thought this additive caused lung cancer and other kinds of bronchial illnesses among the public in Canada. The company that made this additive is located in Richmond, Virginia. So once this law passed, the company in Richmond, Virginia went to the NAFTA tribunal and sued the government of Canada for passing a law that was in essence a takings, that would take their profits, and they were wronged as a result. Canada was so certain, the government of Canada was so certain that they would lose in this NAFTA tribunal. Usually these tribunals are made up of trade lawyers, not public health advocates, not consumer advocates, but usually trade lawyers. They were so certain they were going to lose this that they settled out of court. The government of Canada, taxpayers, paid the company in Richmond, Virginia, $13 million. Of course, Canadian dollars weren't worth much 5 years ago. Paid $13 million, and the Canadian government repealed their public health law. That's what happens when these trade agreements allow corporations basically to have more power and sovereign governments less. And that's that works so well for corporate America, that provision, so-called investor-state relations, investor-state provisions, that provision has been in every trade agreement since. Under NAFTA, more than $20 million in addition to the $13 million has been paid to foreign investors in cases involving zoning rules for a toxic waste dump. That was brought against the government of Mexico, forestry conservation rules, and other issues. And we can see the same kinds of things happening in the climate change debate when lawyers threaten WTO or trade violations for actions to cap carbon and ensure we do not rely on imports that enter without the carbon tax. So we're going to continue on these issues to give standing in international tribunals, various kinds of international trade courts, if you will, to have the power to undo what are public interest, public health, consumer protection, food safety, worker protection laws to allow corporations to go into international courts like that and overturn the democratically attained rule or law protecting the public. We see this with a wave of unsafe imports, from pet food to toothpaste to seafood to heparin. Consumers have an array of choices, but are truly playing roulette with public safety and public health. As lawmakers, just 2 weeks ago, Senator Kennedy asked me to chair the Help Committee when we were talking to some drug companies and to the FDA about heparin. And the head of the FDA said to me, yes, companies, you know the story with heparin, that there were ingredients coming from China that were contaminated, and several dozen, I believe, American citizens died, and probably elsewhere, from this contaminated heparin, a blood thinner. And the head of the top person in the FDA in charge of drug monitoring safety, a woman named Janet Woodcock, when I asked her a question about these ingredients and asked her a question about U.S. companies like Pfizer, Pfizer was on the panel, of going abroad to another country to manufacture and buy or manufacture these ingredients. She said of course our drug companies are now outsourcing these jobs because they have weaker environmental rules in those countries. So you can make an economic case, perhaps, that outsourcing serves business and consumers and our country well. You can make that case. I don't agree with it, but you can make that case. You can't make a very good case for our drug companies outsourcing jobs to countries that don't have a good, solid FDA regimen like we do, or that buy ingredients from companies that don't have those same rules and regulations. Then, to make it even worse, the Bush administration has weakened consumer product safety. Think about the toxic toys coming in, the lead-based paint. They've weakened consumer product safety and weakened food safety rules in this country, and then they've cut back on the number of inspectors. So it's sort of 3 strikes and you're out, the way that this has all come together. So as lawmakers work on increasing resources and inspections at the border, and that's one of the things we're doing, that's only part of the puzzle, obviously. It's apparent that the arm of justice still comes up short in ensuring the safety of these toys and the purity of the food manufactured overseas by subcontractors and multinational corporations. And one more piece on the point about the toy safety is that when American contractors when American companies like Hasbro subcontract these jobs to China, at the same time they push these Chinese subcontractors to cut costs, and that's why they use lead paint, because lead paint's cheaper to apply and dries faster, cheaper to buy, cheaper to apply, and we end up with all the terrible things that happened to China that Connie wrote about recently. This is no way a reflection of the Chinese people. I mean, Chinese workers are suffering from when they're using this lead paint and they're putting it on those toys. Probably many more of them are getting sick than the American kids that ultimately have those toys in their bedrooms. The goal of globalization must be to raise standards, not lower them. Business protects its interests in these trade agreements. There's no doubt about that, as they should. It's time that workers, that people advocating for an environment, for food safety advocates, product safety advocates are protected. I'm introducing a bill in the coming weeks that outlines a new model for trade agreements. It's not so much, it will be a bit of a blueprint on what should be in these trade agreements, but it's more about process, what we need to do so that Congress doesn't give away its authority in violation of what the Constitution we've handed down with this Constitution over decades and decades. Again, that's why the work that you do at ACS is so important. I want to close by said something Lisa said in her early comments when she said that freedom and justice aren't handed to you, aren't handed to us. And I want to put this a bit, as I close, in somewhat of an historical context of where we've been in the last 100 years or so. And many of you, and some of you have heard this story, I apologize, that I wear in my pen on my lapel a pen that depicts a canary in a bird cage. And you may know the story. 100 years ago, the mine workers took the canary down in the mine. If the canary died from toxic gas or lack of oxygen, the mine worker knew he had to get out of the mine. He had no government that cared enough to protect him and no union strong enough to protect him in those days, so he really was on his own. And you look what's happened in the 110 years since 1900, or the hundreds of the last century. And in those days, a child born in this country, when they took the canary down in the mines, a child born in this country had a life expectancy of about 45 years. Today, we live about 30 years longer. And it's not just miracle drugs and heart transplants. That lengthens the lives of many. But it really is what we have done as progressives in this country to build a progressive movement. Medicare, Social Security, prohibition of child labor, civil rights, clean air laws, safe drinking water, public water and sewer systems, public education, Social Security, all the things that we have done in our churches and temples and in our union halls and with advocates like you that really have fought for civil liberties and civil justice and all that you do. And when you that's the historical context that I think you should look at 2008 at. In the early part of the 20th century, a majority leader of the Senate named John Worth Kearns from Indiana presided over a Senate that was the first sort of progressive era of the 20th century, with all the things he was able to do with the progressive income tax and workers' compensation and some of the proposals on food safety. Then in the 1930s, in FDR's years, from 1933 to 1936, another progressive era where we got Social Security, where we got WPA, and so many things that really helped to build a middle class, protections for labor rights and all of that. And then in the 1960s with LBJ. And in those days, Mike Mansfield, the majority leader of the Senate, they were able to pass, against great opposition, obviously, many in my political party in those days in the 1960s, they were able to pass civil rights and voting rights and all that they were, and pass Medicare and all the things they were able to do. And it's been 40 years since the last progressive era. And I think when you look at the 2006 results, the voters in this country, in state after state and district after district, were saying, stop. We don't want this betrayal of our heritage and undercutting of our values that has run rampant in the last 10 years in this country. We want something different. In 2008, we're going to find out more and more about what that different is. We're going to see this, I think we're going to see this new progressive era. We're going to, if I could be slightly partisan for a moment, the Democrats, progressives are going to pick up a few dozen seats in the House, 4, 5, 6, 7 seats in the Senate, and you're going to see several things happen. You're going to see, and a Democratic president, I believe, you're going to see a movement on getting our troops out of Iraq. You're going to see real health care finally. We're going to pass the children's health insurance bill and go much beyond that. We're going to do all the kinds of things that this government should have been doing to fulfill the promise of this wonderful nation. I would close with I look at you and I can see this quote almost written on your foreheads. There was a quote from a Mississippi civil rights leader in the 1960s said, "Don't tell me what you believe, show me what you do, and I'll tell you what you believe." So that's what you're all about. Thank you very much. I might be glad to do some questions and yeah.
Any interest in vice presidency?
0. My first answer is I have interest in staying married. But and I know every politician likes it. And there's an old saying that they did a secret. Someone did a secret. Apocryphal story probably did a secret ballot in the U.S. Senate of who should be the next president. It was a 100-way tie for first. But no, I really honestly don't have interest, and they're not going to ask me first of all. But if they did, I would say no. And the reason.
Do you have any dinner plans with the Obamas in the near future?
But the other thing is, I look at it. I think if you have your eye on something bigger than the U.S. Senate, I think you get too cautious and too centrist, and that's not why I ran for the Senate. I want to fight for the things I talked about today and much more. And I don't think you do that if you're thinking, boy, how's that going to play in the Iowa caucuses in 6 years or 8 years, or how's that going to play in New York or California when I'm trying to raise money? I just don't think you want to look at the world that way. And life's too short to always have to think that way. I don't. As I've said to many people who don't much like my political views, say, there was no surprises in my campaign. You know how I was going to vote when I got there from the campaign, and I'm not going to surprise you again. And so, period. So. Mark, yeah. Sorry.
Is the fight to try to extend warrantless searches dead in the Senate and the House or not?
I don't know. I don't get a read on it. I can't tell. I think that it's nothing. There's sort of the politics of the next 8 months. Well, 6 months, I guess, are such that I was going to say a month ago I would have said the Republicans in the Senate will filibuster anything that the president wants them to. I think these 3 special elections have given them have given them a little pause to do that. And I especially think that, the last one, the first 2 races, they said, well, we had lousy candidates, and they kind of did. But whose fault's that? Ours? But the last race really said to them, you've got serious problems. And I think that you're going to see, for instance, I was just thinking this week as I was reading one of the articles about the Republicans' problems, and that I'm going to talk to Harry Reid next week about, bringing up probably in July the children's health insurance bill again, because I think enough Republicans in the House that voted to sustain, we have enough votes in the Senate to override, enough of them in the House that voted to sustain are going to have second thoughts if they have tough districts, because that's one that you're going to think, why should I protect George Bush? $7 billion, it cost $7 billion to insure 4 million children. $7 billion to insure 4 million children for a year. Since I started speaking 15 minutes ago, we've spent about $4.5 million in Iraq, and we can't do $7 billion for 4 million children. And I would, if I'm a Democratic challenger to a Republican incumbent, and I'm the Republican, if I'm a Republican incumbent with a Democratic challenger, I wouldn't want to try to answer that again. So I think there's some things we might be able to do, but I generally, the dynamic's unclear to me still.
Has it been excruciating for you to be a superdelegate still on the fence, and what's your thinking now?
Does my face look that pained? I mean, really. I have to tell you a story about superdelegate. The pressure is pretty much off now. I mean, it was pressure leading into Ohio was fairly strong, except that I made it real clear I was not going to endorse for the Ohio primary because I wanted to talk about the issues as they. And I've been talking to both candidates pretty regularly. They're more now to their staff people because they're not around as much. But in right leading up to the Ohio primary, there was Connie and I were sitting in the living room one day just reading on a Saturday night about 10 o'clock, 9:30, 8:30. Okay. Sorry. How do you remember what time? Anyway. So the phone rings, and I'm sitting there in the chair reading. She's on the sofa reading, and I pick up the phone, and this young male voice says, "Senator Brown, President Clinton would like to speak with you." I said, "Sure." So I'm holding the phone, and I'm sitting in the chair, and I'm just sitting there like this, and I hear this voice going, "Sherrod," and I said, "Yes, Mr. President." And Connie said, "He can't see you. Why are you standing up?" And it was because the president called. I mean, it's all of you would do the same thing. Trust me in that. But I've said since the primary I'm going to let it play out. And I think, I know a lot of Democrats are concerned. Some of you saw the John McCain Saturday Night Live thing where how much he liked it. But the facts are, there's several facts to keep in mind in all this. Why I don't think this is a bad thing for the country or for those of us that want Democrats to win. You've got Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, two really good candidates that are articulate, smart, know the issues, and there's a lot of energy on our side, and there's a lot of big ideas on our side. On the other side is George W. McCain with no new ideas. It's just more of the same. And we're seeing on the Democratic side not just energy and big ideas. Look at the turnout. In Ohio, 2.1 million, I think. In Democrats, fewer than 1 million Republicans. And the last thing that Connie pointed out is that because of the history made in this campaign, with the first woman and the first African American that had a real legitimate chance at being president, it's this long primary has given. This is something I hadn't thought of until she did. This long primary has given the voters an opportunity to be exposed to the first woman and the first black. If Barack had wrapped it up, if Barack, after winning Iowa, had won New Hampshire and then South Carolina, Hillary's money dried up. He would have been the nominee. Back then, the voters wouldn't have had a chance to really get used to sort of some intensive campaigning right in front of them and get used to the fact there's going to be a black president. Or if it had been Hillary, get used to the fact there's going to be a woman president. And so I think even though the attacks have been sometimes nasty and all the stuff with Wright and with everything else, that was coming out anyway. That was coming out, and McCain was going to bring it out, and the Republicans are going to bring it out. They're doing something awful to Michelle Obama now in the Tennessee or North Carolina did announce the Tennessee Republican Party. I mean, it's just so I think it's time to end it, and I think it will end soon. It's early June after the last primary. And then we have a nominee. And I spoke with Hillary off the Senate floor the other day about all this, and she can read and she knows the numbers and she's still hopeful, but not. I mean, I'm not saying anything that you wouldn't already think, but she knows that the loser will campaign for the winner, and that's just the way it's going to be. And we'll campaign, especially in those places that really need it. Ted Strickland will, if it's Barack, it likely will be Ted Strickland. Will spend a lot of time in Southeast Ohio where he's really needed. And so will Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, I'll bet you. And, we're going to win the state for him.
Senator, perhaps on this side of the room, although I don't have a microphone, as a concerned progressive and, in fact, a Medicare recipient, I'd like to know what the status is. I think one is 2166, but some of the bills to help Medicare Part D, the yellow legal pad, the pharmaceuticals were given for our drug prescription plan, and also maintaining traditional Medicare. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Chuck, for that. I don't want to go in a lot of detail, but there's something sort of interesting, particularly about the way you asked the question. Some years ago, Medicare began a slow process of privatization. Started, unfortunately, by President Clinton, but I don't think he really knew what he was quite getting into when he did this. The managed care companies came to the president and said in 1998, perhaps, and said, we can take care of Medicare patients, give them better services because we're efficient at lower cost. And we propose that you figure the average cost of a Medicare beneficiary. In those days, you took 40 million beneficiaries, and the Medicare budget was about $200 billion, so it was about $5,000 a Medicare beneficiary on the average that Medicare was spending. And they said, we will insure anybody that comes to us for 5% less than that $5,000. And the administration says, good idea. It'll make Medicare more efficient. It will save us money. Well, a couple things happened. One is that the Medicare the private HMOs in Medicare began to cherry pick, and they took and understand that in those days the 5% most expensive, maybe the 10% most expensive Medicare beneficiaries cost $37,000 a person. The 90% rest cost about $1,200. So what that means is that Medicare managed care private companies would go after the 90% and would make money on them, ultimately costing the government more money. And they did it in a variety of ways. You can't legally cherry pick a program. You're not legally allowed to do that. But what the managed care companies did, in some cases, they put their offices on second floors of buildings with no elevators. Think about that. They conducted recruitment dances. So if you come here, you can sign up and get a Medicare discount. But the people that are costing $37,000 a year in their last 6 months of life aren't going to those places. So that was bad enough. But then when the Republican Congress, and then when Bush came, this 95% ended up being 100%, 105%. Now we pay private managed care companies 112% of what it costs the government in traditional fee-for-service Medicare. So that's the first battle, is bringing that back to 100%, or I don't think we're going to eliminate the partial privatization of Medicare. We're just going to stop it in its tracks. The second issue there is on the prescription drug benefit, that it's just a total racket the way it was set up. The government can't negotiate prices. That will be high on the agenda. We tried to do it this year. The Republicans filibustered it. My guess is we'll succeed. The VA does negotiations on behalf of all of its veterans for drugs and gets them for about half the cost of what Medicare Part D pays for those drugs. Where's mine? Okay, go ahead.
This is regarding your quote from McCain. We all know that most of the radical activism from the courts is now coming from the right, and that's where the rupture from our law, we're seeing it the most. Why don't we make more of that? Why aren't we talking about that? If judicial activism has a bad name, why aren't we throwing that back at them?
Do it. I mean, I think you should. My guess is I'm. Well, I agree. You're right. But you have a lot of friends and not just people in this room. I would say this to that. I think that comes out of the Democrats' failure in opposing Bush judges. Failure in this sense that the Democrats' opposition to most of the Bush court, whether it's the appellate court or whether it's district court or whether it's Supreme Court, was they judged these candidates fairly narrowly. They judged them on choice. They judged them on maybe some separation of powers issues, but they didn't judge them on the economic issues that we should judge them on too. And so I think that when people think of judges, they think of most voters, conservative and liberal, think of judges more in terms of abortion, in terms of gay rights, all fundamentally very important civil liberties questions and American value questions, and we're right on those issues. But they don't think of what these economic issues are. Look at the Ledbetter case. I mean, how outrageous was that? And 90% of Americans would have disagreed with that. But most people think of the liberal judiciary or the conservative judiciary as social issues, not as economic issues. And one of the things I said in my Senate race early, and then when Roberts and Alito were up, and the press said, how would you vote? And I said, I'd vote no. And I said, I'd vote no, not just because of the issues that the Democrats now in judiciary are talking about, but also how they decided on issues of pay discrimination, how they decided on sex discrimination in the workplace, how they decided on age discrimination, how they decided on race, all of those issues on not narrow, on economic issues. And that's where I think we've got to do better. If we can shift the debate to the economic issues better, as I think we win elections generally by shifting the debate to economic issues. I mean, I did really well in a lot of southeast Ohio counties that John Kerry got creamed in because I talked about health care and jobs and minimum wage and sending their kid to college. So I think if we can move that debate, we're going to have much more luck, much more success in doing what you suggest. That's it.
Well, I just want to thank Senator Sherrod Brown and Connie Schultz again for their beautiful remarks. And it just reminds us again, as Ohioans, how privileged we are to have such a wonderful couple representing us in their various fields, and how much we really do have the ability to do the work to make the change that they both talked about. So I hope that one way that you all get engaged in that work is to stick with ACS. In your programs, we have a little reminder for our upcoming panel event, which we're going to co-host with Cleveland Marshall College of Law, going inside the immigration debate, a Thursday evening, June 19th. We have a wonderful panel of business leaders, immigrants' rights activists, a government attorney, and an immigrants' rights attorney, and it should be a really incredible evening and a chance, again, to get updated on an issue that we all know we need to know a lot more about, but maybe don't right now, or because our areas of practice don't bring us into contact with it, we're not as up to date as we should be. So please join us again. That's a free 1.5-hour CLE event on June 19th, and stay tuned to your email for information on all of our ACS events. Re-up your membership. We're one of the most affordable groups in town, so please check that out. And thank you once again all for joining us today. Have a great day.